Welcome, everybody. I'm Bonnie Hunter. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the executive director at North York Community House. And we're thrilled to be holding the third session in this very special series, and so glad that all of you could join us today. I'm going to hand things over to our wonderful Truth and Reconciliation Coordinator, Joan Frame.
Good morning, everybody. It's middle of December already. I can't hardly believe that we are where we're at, but I'm super excited for today. I am really, really lucky in my job that I pretty much get to chase people that I really admire and love a lot and get them to do stuff for us and hope that they'll say yes. And so today is one of those magical moments. This morning, Yvonne Miracle is going to acknowledge the land for us. I joke and say that Yvonne is responsible for the person I am today single-handedly. And, I really do feel that way, but just the good parts of me, not the bad parts we've just been laughing about. She has been a longtime member of the Hamilton community, and she sadly moved back home to Tiandenaga, where she's establishing her life, and we keep wanting her back, but she's not there. But she is magically by technology here to acknowledge the land with us today, and then we'll get right into things with Nigaan Sinclair. So I'm just so thrilled. It's just a massively great day. So here we go.
Thank you,
Off
Joan.
to you.
Thank you, Joan. Joan and I, yes, she did call me yesterday. Yvonne, can you do this? Right? We had kind of discussed land acknowledgements and how we feel about them, right? And there is something that as Indigenous people that we do. We don't necessarily do the land acknowledgements because we know where we came from. So in the sense, though, that is very important to our people and that we do is basically is to give thanks. Words before all else. Okay. And when you're in a formal setting with Indigenous people, you might hear that saying, words before all else. And what that actually means, I know in some ways, in the way things have been set up is looking at and giving recognition to the land you're on. But like I said, for us, we already know the land we're on. Right. So in the sense, before we do anything formal, any type of gathering, words before all else means is giving thanks, right? It's plain and simple. It's just giving thanks. So what I'm here today to do from my home here on Tignanaga is I'm going to offer a prayer, and it does recognize what we should be thankful for. And so as Indigenous people, in the way we were taught way back when, it wasn't to pray to get things, but pray to give thanks. And that's really what the Thanksgiving address is about, is to give thanks for everything that we hold dear and precious to our hearts, okay? So before I begin, I'm just going to say a couple things. So, yes, my name's Yvonne Miracle. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm an auntie to 18 nieces and nephews, and I think I got over 23 right now, great nieces and nephews. I'm an artist, I'm an activist, and yes, I was in the Hamilton community, serving my community for over 33 years. So I was also one of the people, if anyone from the Hamilton area ever attended any of our Soaring Spirit festivals, I was one of the main people behind that. So that's something that I like to think is part of my legacy that I left behind in Hamilton, was the annual festivals. And we did over 33 years of them. So I'm hoping they continue since I've left. And I know in the last couple of years, I've managed to stay a part of them, which is good. So, but they are going to be continuing in some way and form, I hope. Anyway, 4 things I did want to say. Does the air need us? Think about it. We're adults. Does the air need us? Does the water need us? Does the land need us? Do the animals need us? And you think about it. If any one of those were to leave this world, we would die as human beings. Okay? Those are just the 4 basic elements there that we need to survive. But yet they don't need us. So we need to stop polluting Mother Earth and what we're doing. Okay. So otherwise, I'm going to go into my prayer. I'd like to thank the Creator for all that we have, for the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the land we walk upon. Creator, we pray to you this day to give thanks for everything we hold dear and precious to our hearts, Creator. We thank you for this beautiful day, this day of life, this day of living. And for this we pray and we give thanks. We give thanks, Creator, to Brother Sun, who rises each day to give us light, warmth, and energy. And for this we pray and we give thanks to Brother Sun. We give thanks, Creator, to the north, the south, the east, and the west winds, as they blow away the pollutions that bring the clear air and the rains and the snows to replenish Mother Earth. And for this too, Creator, we pray and we give thanks. We give thanks, Creator, to the nighttime sky and Grandmother Moon and stars above, as she looks after the women, the children, Mother Earth herself. For this too, Creator, we pray and we give thanks. And we give thanks, Creator, from the smallest of seeds to the tallest of trees, as you provide us nourishment, medicines, and shelter. For this too, Creator, we pray and we give thanks. And we give thanks, Creator, to the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the six-leggeds, the eight-leggeds, the swimmers, the flyers, the crawlers. For all the creatures you place before us, Creator, we pray, and we give thanks for those creatures. And finally, Creator, we pray for those who have passed over to the other side, our ancestors, our loved ones, those who've left this world to venture to the next. We pray for their well-being of spirit and mind as they make that journey to the other side. And for this too, Creator, we pray, and we give thanks. So again, I thank you for listening to my words, right? But really, it is about the Thanksgiving address. And if we were really to do this in ceremony, we could be looking at a week or two to go through all this. Thank yous for what we have. And when I talk about the earth as our mother, she is our mother, right? And it's so important to know that. And that's why I said what I said in the beginning about those four elements, because those four elements come from our mother, the earth. And I hate to say, unfortunately, we're doing a lot of destruction on her nowadays, throughout the wars, throughout digging her up, crushing her down, you know. And again, we damage our mother. We have nowhere else to go. Right? I know they're looking to go to space, but I don't think this crew won't be there. That might be futures to come. But again, just very naturally, those four elements to respect, right? And when you think about it as older people, it's our children, it's our grandchildren that will inherit this earth. And what kind of mess are we going to leave behind? So I like to bring those words to people to let them know how precious our mother is. And when we talk about land acknowledgement, let's talk about our mother and how important she is to us. It doesn't matter what words can be said, action, and it's how we treat our mother. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come in and to participate and to say my prayer and to share my words with everybody. But if anything today is learned, besides the great treaties that I know my friend's going to share, is respect our mother, being Mother Earth. Thank you. Hey, Joan.
Yeah, Yvonne, thank you so much. And Nigaan, I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Okay. So big miigwech to Joan and big miigwech to Yvonne for that beautiful opening. One thing that Haudenosaunee people do really well is that opening address. And if you get the full version, we could be here all day. So
do a week.
Because what they do is this is why us Anishinaabe, we're a little bit we don't do it quite as well as that opening greeting, that opening ceremony that the Haudenosaunee do, which is every single being is recognized and given their place. And if you ever hear Tom Porter give it, you'll be there for a week. And so, because Tom does an incredible job. But miigwech to Yvonne for giving us the fast version, because we only have an hour. So very efficiently, way to go. And so, yeah, everything that Yvonne said, I'm going to just say ditto, because what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is about the manifestation of that thanks, of that recognition of the life within the land, and how it is then embodied in relationships of those beings who live on the land. There has never been a time without treaties. And we have to get away from two thoughts that are going to hamper our discussion. They're going to hurt the ways in which we vision treaty. And so I'm just going to get them away first off the start. treaties are not really about humans. And the second is that there has never been a time without treaties. And so to really start a conversation on treaties for Indigenous peoples, we have to go back to our creation stories. And if you think back to why I have done the sessions in the way that I have, and for those of you that haven't had a chance to catch all of the different talks that we've given, this is number 3 in our series. The first one was on gift giving. And if we remember back to the conversation that we had around tobacco, that's going to be really important for you to remember for today. Now, if you didn't attend that session, I'm going to do a very, very quick version. But you remember that the version on tobacco that I spoke about the very first session took almost the entire time, in which for you to understand what tobacco means that we are talking about the gift of the earth, or the gift of the earth, the way the earth teaches us in the ways in which we interact with each other as human beings. And the second is the conversation that we had around the land, which is that our relationship with the land is something that is exactly what Yvonne spoke about, which is that it is our central and most key, our mother, our relationship that must be cared for so that it cares for us. And our relationship with the earth is one of not ownership, which is an arbitrary created idea. It's one of a loving, caring relationship that we, and any of you who have been in a dysfunctional relationship know that when dysfunction breeds dysfunction. But amazingly, regardless of the amount of dysfunction that we offer to the earth still returns us with love. Almost imminently. Every once in a while, that love is sometimes a hard love. It's a difficult love. Like, for instance, I think COVID-19 was a difficult lesson for us to care for the earth more and to care for each other more. And the land was very much teaching us about the value of caring for one another. But those two teachings that I started off with, gift giving and the land, will be essential for today to understand treaties. But just before I forget, I want to just point out that the next 2 sessions are going to be really important as well, because we're going to talk about education in January. I believe it's January 18th. And then I'm actually going to physically be there. I'm going to be there in the North York Center for the session on February 8th, I believe. Yes, February 8th. And I haven't told Joan this, so surprise, Joan, surprise. I'm going to be physically there in Toronto for the session on February 8th, which is a question asking session. So that means is that you can ask anything that you want about the first 4 sessions, or anything that you'd like to ask about anything to do with Indigenous peoples. It could be about the new national chief for the Assembly of First Nations. It can be about the Reconciliation Barometer report, which just came out 2 days ago, which suggests that Canadians are starting to understand reconciliation more, but are realizing the work that's involved with that. It could be about the new First Nations premier in Manitoba. It could be about, whatever that you'd like. We could talk about the Ring of Fire if you want, or the Green Belt, or whatever you'd like. On February 8th. So I will physically be there at the North York. So those of you that want to come by the office, I will be there. I'll also be I think they'll set up the online. But like I said, I just sprung that on you. So sorry, Bonnie. Sorry, Joan. That's just I'm going to be there. Joan asked me to come in. So there you go. So surprise. Okay. Treaties. Treaties are about understanding the relationships that the land have to teach us. And that's why treaties don't begin with human beings. We often think of treaties as about the way human beings interact on the land, but the sun and the moon have a treaty. And Anishinaabe people looked out onto the land on the sky and saw that there is a consistency and a commitment. And remember those 2 words, consistency and commitment, that suggest in the cycles of creation, that are embodied within the cycles of creation. We could insert anything in here. We could say the bears and the fish. We could say the algae and the water. We could say the trees and the birds. There is a consistency and a commitment that create the cycles of creation. Okay, so that's what I like to teach my students, is that if you see what Anishinaabe are talking about when we talk about treaty, it is embodied within the teachings of the land. And so we must bring the teaching of the land into our relationships. Now, do you remember we talked about tobacco? Now, if you remember from our first session, I explained to you that tobacco represents time. So it comes from the word asema, which means instant, and that when tobacco is offered and it's presented and somebody accepts it, there's a commitment. It's a legal relationship. It's a relationship of time. The time that it took for me to foster, to grow, to plant, to care for, to dry, to create this tiny little bit of earth, my blood, my sweat, my tears, I am now offering that to you with the expectation that you will perhaps take that. And then when you take that, that's a legal relationship to say, miigwech, I will return this. So miigwech, miigwe means to give. So I will give you back the time that you have offered to me. And that's what relationships are. Relationships are about time. That's why every gift has a string. When you offer, for instance, this is the gift-giving season, so whatever faith or religion that you are a part of, whether you're Anishinaabe, where we have a feast-giving time, or whether you're Jewish, where you have Hanukkah, or whether you're Christian, you have Christmas, or whether you're Muslim, you have not quite this time of year as gift-giving, but I think there's a general time of spending time with family. And so the other gift-giving times that all other faiths and religions have throughout the world, this is really the gift-giving time. And ultimately, what is the expectation when someone offers you a gift? Well, it is to return your time. When someone brings you food, they expect to sit with you and have a meal. When somebody brings you a gift like a book, they expect you to read it, to spend your time with it. When someone offers their hand, they're offering that space. That's an actual real way to think about treaty, which is they're offering to share space with you. Or when someone offers you a hello or a story, they expect your time. That's why time is the currency of relationships. So when Anishinaabe looked out into the world, and we saw the sun and the moon, and we spent time with other people, and we particularly heard, one thing about Anishinaabe people is because we migrated across Turtle Island starting in about 700 AD, and our traditional territory as Ojibwe people are out near the New York area. That's where we were thought to, our creation story really begins. Is us placed in those territories. But as we began to migrate across other people's territories, we picked up little teachings along the way. And one of our most important teachings was with our Haudenosaunee relations, which is to really think about the little intricacies of creation, the tiniest bugs or the molecules or the tiny things that are related to the really big things like the sky. How does a granule of sand relate with the sky and the universe? And all of those things we learned a lot from spending time with our relations, or like with our Lakota relations of how do we spend time with the earth and our bodies. And we picked up some of those ceremonies that the Lakota, Dakota people gave to us. And so all of those things that we spent, and we spent a lot of time thinking about the earth. And we go, oh, okay, so let's go to the sun and the moon, for example. They travel together in cycles, and they never give up on each other. They never take off on one another. They always stay committed, no matter what the cause, no matter what the clouds, no matter what the season. They are consistently and continually always staying together. And Anishinaabe for a long time realized that, and they realized, oh, the stars and the sky are the same. There would be a pattern in the ways in which things worked. Or let's get down to the smaller parts of the universe. The bears and the fish had a relationship in which the bears ate the fish, but when the bears died, they turned into the land, the algae, which eventually fed the fish. And we went, oh, there's a whole relationship here of agreeing to share space when they stay committed to each other. And it's about consistency, because there's never a time that ends. And that, my relatives, is what treaty is all about. So in the early treaties, when Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples came together, it was non-Indigenous peoples who, frankly, were lost. completely confused, had no ability to live in this place. It's like, for example, in Manitoba here, where I'm from, Treaty 1 territory, the first treaty after Confederation, Canadian Confederation, the first settlers showed up here in about 1790, 1785 or so. And the first British settlers, there's actually French ones before that, but the first British settlers, who are the ones who are invested in creating treaty, because they had an idea that the king in 1763 declared ownership over everything in North America. That was the idea, that the British king, if you ever see the musical Hamilton, Hamilton features a king in that musical, and it was for a while in the downtown at the Prince of Wales Theatre, so maybe you would have seen it. But the king in that play was a very arrogant guy. In 1763, he had a war with the French over basically colonies and world domination and so on. And so at the end of that war in 1763, what was called the 7 Years' War, the King George III said, everything in North America is mine up to the Rocky Mountains, everything I can see. And that's a really important little caveat there, because he will only claim the lands up to the Rocky Mountains, which means that BC will never get claimed. And that will create a problem for Canada later, especially when you think about the modern treaty process today. There's no treaties in BC. And that's because of that one little thing the king did way back in 1763. And in 1763, when the king did that, he then sent out all of his representatives. He said, okay, go and take all those French communities, all those communities where the French people were, and declare the land as British now. And of course, which is pretty silly when you think about it, because Indigenous peoples had actually pretty good relationships with French. Well, maybe not the Haudenosaunee, but certainly near the Anishinaabe. We had really close relationships with the French. We loved them. We actually called them the Wemetigojawack, which was those who had the white sails. We really liked those guys. And we actually, birthed the Métis Nation out of our relationships with the French, or what's called the Bois Boulay. But without getting too deep into that, the French then were in our communities, and the British show up one day and they say, oh, by the way, everybody, we claimed all your land. And this will create a special treaty that will be formed in 1764, just near where you are in Niagara, which the Anishinaabe were a really big part of. The Haudenosaunee were also a part of it as well. And the Treaty of Niagara created a relationship at that time with the British, where there was somewhat of a recognition that the British were going to build healthy relationships with Indigenous communities. And there was a treaty called the Covenant Chain. And that covenant chain was committed to by the British, that they would act in good faith. Now, by the time they reach Manitoba in the 1780s, 1790s, which is where my story really begins, the British people show up in Manitoba in October. Do you know how stupid you have to be to show up in Manitoba in October? Like, it's minus 30 degrees in November. So guess what happens? Almost all the British people die, except for a couple leaders, a couple guys that generally, could find some furs to lay under. But the British basically have a terrible time living in Manitoba. And they are saved by my people, by Anishinaabe people, particularly Chief Peguis and the other chiefs along the Red River. And that's a demonstration to tell you that when Europeans arrived in North America, whether it be the very first Europeans like Jacques Cartier meeting the Iroquois, or the Haudenosaunee people way out in where Montreal is now, or whether it be the Selkirk settlers sent after the Royal Proclamation of 1763 into Manitoba in the 1790s, basically Europeans are lost every time they show up. They don't know what they're doing. They generally don't know where the medicines are. They can't catch the food. And most of them have scurvy anyways. So they need birch tea to save their lives, And so generally, here's what happens is that Indigenous people start to teach them. They start to teach them how to live in this place. One of the most important teachings is around tobacco and about building relationships with each other. And one of the things that we teach Europeans is about the consistency and the commitment within the cycles of creation, by going, oh, do you want to learn how to catch the bison? Well, every season they come right about this time, and they come right by this hill right here. And so we will teach you how to catch bison. We will also teach you when the geese come back. We'll teach you about when the moon is renewed. We'll teach you about when the turtles come that make a really special kind of medicine in our territory. And they come consistency, because with commitment and consistency every year, because we are kind to them, because we don't take too much, because we always use the entirety of the being if they offer themselves to us. And we put a little bit of tobacco down to say miigwech to that being for offering, whether it's a deer or a turtle or the water or the earth, the tree, whatever it is that we're going to take a little bit from the earth, we have to return a little bit back. And that will often be tobacco, but it's often our time and our care and our concern. And this is a really important teaching for you to understand, because what it does is it gets you beyond this really problematic way of viewing treaty, which is that it's just about Canadian government or about the crown, because treaty doesn't begin with the Canadian government or the crown. It begins with Indigenous peoples teaching Europeans how to live in this place, which is about consistency and commitment and driven by kindness. That's what kindness is ultimately all about, which is about building a relationship in a space where kindness begets more kindness, that we, by living together, when we are kind to one another, therefore the land, just like when we are kind to the land will be kind to us. It won't give us sickness, and the deer won't run away, so we have nothing to eat. When we are kind to the earth, it will be kind to us. And we taught Europeans that. We taught those who came in, even though they came in with the brutal message, oh, by the way, we all of your land is ours. And we were like, that's not very kind, but let us teach you how to live in this place. Half you died by Christmas anyways. So as we began to teach Europeans, then things began to shift and change a little bit. And the very first treaties are created in Manitoba, or actually I want to create a sort of picture of you in Ontario as well. So I've actually got a little vision here of what the treaties look like in Ontario. Now, one of the hard things about talking about treaty is treaties look differently everywhere that you go, but the principles for Indigenous peoples are still the same. So that's the important thing to remember, which is that when treaties begin to be formed in Ontario, which is where you are now, and as you can see here in the very bottom part, is there are hundreds of treaties, what's called pre-Confederation treaties, that are created in Ontario, and most of them are created after the War of 1812, the war between British forces and American forces. But one of the most important things to understand about that is that when Britain declared war on the United States, because of the relationship that British people, after the Treaty of Niagara and learning Indigenous ways about consistency and commitment, there began to become a familial kinship relationship between Indigenous peoples and British peoples. That's my nicest way of explaining that. To the point where people began to build relationships with each other, and that relationship would be essential for the British by the War of 1812, when Canada, and a lot of people might not know this, but what British forces declared war on the Americans. And at that war, the British, with Indigenous peoples, went down and burnt down the White House. A lot of people don't know about that history, especially if you're a newcomer. And sometimes I'm thinking, especially when Donald Trump was in office, I was like, hey, that's a pretty good idea. But anyways, there was a war between America and Canada way back in 1812. Now, after that war, when America and Canada, it's basically a stalemate, but they declare that all the British loyalists have to come and move north of the border. And that's where you get many treaties that are originally formed in Ontario, but they aren't really treaties. For Indigenous peoples, they're treaties, but they were intended to be in the vein of the kind of family kinship relationship that was supposed to be embedded in the teachings of the earth, the teachings of giving each other time and respect and kindness. And that's not what happened. And so after the War of 1812, about 1814 and onwards, thousands of British people come and settle into what's now known as Southern Ontario. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands, and they flood out the territories. Some of those people are actually Indigenous peoples. They are people who were affiliated with the British forces and often lived on the American side. And they also came in, and they were all, some of those Indigenous peoples had used that area as traditional hunting grounds, but then began to live permanently in Southern Ontario too. So there are many Europeans, also a few Indigenous peoples. But Indigenous peoples at that point then began to suffer from the massive influx of peoples, which then resulted in the loss of caribou, the pollution of waters, and the springing up of Toronto, of Hamilton, of all Guelph, all the different urban spaces that are in Southern Ontario now. Because there was a rush to move into those territories, those treaties were often negotiated after the fact. And I just want to mention that to all of you, because in Southern Ontario, it's still a long-standing issue that treaties that were imposed upon Indigenous peoples were not really treaties. These were things called land cession agreements, which were never really agreements. It was generally settlers would come in, plop their land, declare they had a farm there, declare they were going to build a pulp mill there, declare that they were going to start a business or a city or a town. And Indigenous peoples had no say in that. And that the British forces would come in and later go, oh, this is now a treaty. And Indigenous peoples would be like, what? Where's all the kindness part? Where's the sharing part? Where's the co-governance part? That's what we're supposed to be by learning from the way the sun and the moon operate. They're supposed to work together, but they're supposed to share. They're supposed to be kind to each other. And that did not happen after the War of 1812. Now, the reason that I bring that up is because when Canada is confederated, meaning that Canada becomes to become the country that it is in 1867, about 50 years later, Canada then makes the Royal Proclamation law. And what the Royal Proclamation said way back in 1763 by the King George III is that I own everything, but I have to buy it. And so that means that Indigenous peoples, unlike after the War of 1812, where there wasn't a lot of time, there wasn't a lot of interest by the British forces to kind of recognize that, although arguably that may be why they came in and even negotiated in the treaties in the first place, is that there's a recognition that Indigenous peoples own the land way back in 1763 by the king. Now, Indigenous peoples don't think like that. We don't think like we own the land. What we do is we have a relationship with the land. And yes, we have land claims, and yes, we have territories that we claim that we care for, but we care for it because it cares for us. We care about the bison migration because we don't take too much, and we depend on this for our livelihood. So someone just can't come in and take it. So there is a kind of sense of claiming of territory, but it isn't in the kind of domination or domineering way that Europeans thought of the ownership of land, which is kind of like slavery. Like, I own the land, it has no say, it has no rights, I get to decide everything I do with it. Indigenous peoples aren't like that. Indigenous peoples would say, I have a relationship with this river, with this plain, with this mountain, and therefore our consistency and commitment is that I have an obligation to care for it. And so someone can't come in and suddenly come and occupy it because they don't have that responsibility, and they are infringing on the responsibility that I have. And that's where wars begin between Indigenous nations. So it's not really about ownership going, I own the land. It's saying I own the relationship to the land. Anyways, the reason this is really important to understand, because when ownership was imposed upon Indigenous peoples, then you get the idea that these treaties then become ultimately about rights. So therefore, then when Canada confederated and they begin to negotiate what's called the numbered treaties, which covers most of the country, but notice not British Columbia, because the king didn't claim past the Rocky Mountains. So those treaties are still being negotiated. There's still treaties in BC that are still today being negotiated, but the king claimed all of this territory. And therefore, the king sent their representatives to these lands and negotiated very quickly with Indigenous leaders treaties that were ultimately about rights. We have a right to build a city here. We will give you $5 a year, which is obviously a terrible bad joke, because that's not what the land is worth then or now. But today they still go, well, we're still going to give you $5 every single year as in perpetuity, which is still happening today. You can still get your $5 as a treaty right as a status Indian. And then you'll get the land put off. We'll put some land off to the side for you in your traditional territory, and we will give you certain rights, meaning that we'll build a school on your reserve. We'll make sure there's infrastructure. There's a building there. We'll make sure there's some roads. We'll make sure that there's some things that you can continue your way of life. Now, of course, as you begin to realize that none of those things really happened, and if they did happen, they were always substandard and poor. The school would be very badly built. Sometimes it would be residential schools where they'd send the children away way off reserve. The roads would be poor. What you begin to realize is that the treaties that Canada negotiated weren't really in the interests of a kind relationship with Indigenous peoples. It was in the interest of moving Indigenous peoples off the land into a tiny corner out of the way, so that the train line could be built for Canada, so that the land could be farmed, and that Eastern Canada, particularly Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal, could build an economy off the lands and the resources of the West. And then particularly that treaty was used by Europeans to generally claim the land legally according to European or Canadian law. And that's within the Constitution. So within the Constitution, Canada's Constitution, it says that the Crown will take control of land of Indian land and lands reserved for Indians, or Indians and lands reserved for Indians. So that's Section 91 of the Constitution. So we are the only people in Canada that are claimed and owned by the state, or controlled by the state. Now, before I get too more into understanding about what treaties ultimately look like, is that's not what the vision of treaties were supposed to be. Treaties were supposed to be about the sun and the moon working together, or the bear and the fish working together, the plants and the earth working together, watching the ways the birds and the trees work together. It's about a commitment, a consistent relationship of sharing, of kindness. And that's what Indigenous people sought when building treaties, because that's still embedded in the teachings of today. We can still see that today. We can see that in the tobacco offerings. We can see that in Yvonne's words. We can see that within the ways Indigenous peoples feast and offer gifts today. But Canada has used treaties, things that Indigenous peoples had originally taught them, and hammered them into a model around ownership and rights. So now treaties are often viewed as human documents between peoples to share space, but they aren't really about sharing space, because Indigenous peoples are pushed way off to the side. Canada gets all of this land, and then it becomes an issue of rights. You have a right on that tiny little plot over there. We have a right to build an entire economy and millions of dollars and beautiful homes while you're sitting in poverty over there. And we will give you a few little rights here and there. So what are those rights? Treaty rights generally tend to be, and I'll just zoom to a slide over here, so that, because these are the things that oftentimes are what, especially people who are coming to treaties for the very first time, think, oh, Indigenous peoples get all these free things. They do not. It is in fact Canada who gets all the free things, because Canada has taken all the land unjustly, manipulated treaties to do so, and has never paid anything other than a few pennies for that relationship. But people would go, oh, okay, well, I see Indigenous peoples get the following things. They have a reserve over here. The land they don't own. Remember how the king said they own everything? The king owns everything. So treaty land, or status reserves, or First Nations reserves, they are lands held in trust by the Canadian government under the Constitution, so that Indians don't get to own the land, or Indigenous peoples don't get to own the land. The land is held in trust for them. The $3 to $5 a year There are certain things, allowance for blankets or tools. That's something that happened, a couple hundred years ago, but actually was a treaty right that people evoked during the COVID-19 pandemic, also for medicines. People said that a treaty right was for medicine, to get farming assistance, school or schooling. So that may mean, because there isn't universities on First Nations, that certain First Nations people, a small amount of them, if the money is allocated to that First Nations, can have some of their university paid for. A right for hunting and fishing, that's where you get people who have certain rights to hunt or fish on Crown land or in, for instance, oceans or certain rivers or waterways. And then, of course, infrastructure, that's like roads and buildings. Or this has led to the issue of boil water advisories on First Nations, because Canada is supposed to build safe drinking water for First Nations, but always reneges on that or fails to live up to that responsibility. And so oftentimes I heard the stat yesterday that on 37 First Nations out of 640 in Canada, there are boil water advisories where you can't drink the water. The Trudeau government, by the way, has done a pretty good job with fixing about, it was over 100 a few years ago, and now it's down to 37, but still 37 communities where you can't drink the water. Anyways, so I'll go back to this slide over here, back over here. So just to recap about treaties for just a minute here, so that you can understand a little bit of what we're talking about. When we talk about treaties, we're ultimately talking about the two sessions that we started out with at the beginning: gift giving and the land. What is it that Indigenous peoples learned upon being on the land for tens of thousands of years, millennia, from our very first creation stories? In fact, our creation stories are really treaty telling stories. They're about, how does the sun and the moon work together? How do the birds and the trees work together? How does the sky and the stars work together? And then humans show up. And we, in our creation stories, we're always the last to be created. That when we observe all of these things, we learn law, or what we call Inconnigan, Anishinaabe and Connigan, which is natural law. And natural law is the idea that there are treaties in the world, and that it's best for us to work with the current of creation. It's like traveling on a waterway. You get the farthest when you go with the current. And so to travel to the farthest, it's best that we encapsulate the teachings of the earth, which is treaty. When the Europeans showed up, we taught them how to live in this place. One of the things that we taught them was about treaty, that we learned and we exposed and we witnessed all the things in creation. And the best way to live in this place is to be kind to each other and be consistent and have commitment to each other, share, believe in each other, support each other, take care of each other's children. And that's what treaties were supposed to be. Now, Europeans came in with different ideas, whether it be way back in the days of Jacques Cartier in the 15th century, whether it be the Royal Proclamation of 1763. Europeans were interested in, how do we take the resources in the land and build an economy, oftentimes sending that money back to Europe, or in the case of the prairies, sending that money back to Toronto, to Montreal, to Ottawa. And we're going to claim the land to get that work done. We're going to claim the land. The king says, all the land is mine. And so that does two things. One is it recognizes that Indigenous peoples do have some kind of relationship with the land, because the king said, I have to buy the land from them. And then second is that it puts Indigenous peoples in kind of this problematic relationship with Europeans, and that Europeans really need them to get out of the way. Get out of the way. And so we're going to use treaties to do that. These things that we were taught by Indigenous peoples, and we're going to come there, we're going to offer them $5. We're going to say we bought the land. We're going to write up a document about it. And then we're going to declare that we're going to put them on this little reserve over here, and then make this thing about rights, not about responsibilities, which is about what Indigenous peoples were interested in when we were talking about the consistency and commitment, that the sun and the moon have a responsibility to look after each other, to care for, to share space. And so that never happened. And that treaties are now being used by Canada and imposed upon First Nations and other peoples, because, Métis people, for example, aren't allowed to be a part of treaty. Only now, in the past few years, have the federal government recognized that Métis people are even Indigenous, or that they have the same rights as other Indigenous peoples. Whereas Inuit people, this is a much different relationship, because their legal relationship is a bit later. But during that 19th century from about 1867 on to 1921, which is when the big treaties are formed, settling much of Canada. Canada uses treaties to put Indigenous peoples onto small plots of land and then be governed by certain rights. You'll have a school there. You'll have some infrastructure there. You'll be able to hunt and fish. Oh, and by the way, we won't actually give you any of these things that are, they'll be poorly delivered. They will be full of poverty. They will be full of problems. Like, for instance, we'll say, okay, you can hunt and fish, but only on certain crown land. And by the way, we need you not to leave the reserve. We weren't allowed to leave the reserve until the 1960s. And as First Nations, as status people. So how do you hunt and fish? Like, the geese don't recognize where the reserve ends and begins. So the geese are, so you can't go onto the land across the road to go hunt, but you can go up to the border of the reserve. My point is that the so-called treaty rights, which are still things that people hold very dear today, and importantly so, are the kind of small little things that come from that relationship with Europeans, but it was never supposed to be that way. If you want to know what treaty was supposed to look like, it was supposed to look like Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples governing together, sharing 100% of the land. That I don't care what we do together, we could build a dam together, a hydroelectric dam. We could build a military together. We could build an economy together, or even, I don't know, oil in Alberta. Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples would be co-governing. They would make decisions together, and everybody would benefit. And that would mean that we would not be governed likely by a capitalistic system. We would be worried about a system where everybody's fed. So some people can call that socialism, or call that the scary left-wing, whatever left-wing word you decide to be scared of this week. But if it was about Indigenous peoples, we would make sure that everybody has food. And if you want to know what the example of what that looks like, we actually can see a little bit of what treaty looked like, because healthcare exists. That's an Indigenous idea. And I think I've said this to you before. It is Indigenous peoples who have this crazy idea that we can care for everybody. Europeans had nothing to do with that idea. Europeans learned it from Indigenous peoples. Remember that when we taught Europeans about what it means to be a part of this territory, that's where healthcare comes from. That's also, by the way, where multiculturalism comes from. The idea that we can bring our culture to this place and not be judged for it. It's also where democracy comes from, because democracy is an Indigenous idea, the idea that everybody gets a say. Canada often uses democracy, and the United States, and they say, oh, we're bringing democracy to Iraq, or we're bringing democracy to Africa or Asia or wherever. Often that's not democracy, but anyways, oftentimes they forget, or they've completely forgotten or neglected that it was Indigenous peoples who had the idea of democracy, and Europeans learned it from Indigenous peoples. And so it came from the land. It came from us looking at the earth and the sky and the birds and the trees and the bears and the fish and the sun and the moon, and going, oh, they each get a say. Oh, they each care for each other. Oh, they each have separate cultures. Like, they're not the same, but yet they don't judge each other. And so that's where all the things that we think of as the most proud things about Canada, that's where it comes from. It comes from Indigenous peoples. And that's where we can see the echoes or the residue of treaty. Treaty does exist in our society, but we might not call it that. And so when we recognize territory, as Yvonne did at the very beginning today, when we say we're recognizing and giving thanks to the land, that's where that comes from. It is that the land continues to teach us, and the best parts of us, the parts we're the most proudest of, come from the land. Democracy, healthcare, multiculturalism. I think we all agree that those are the best parts about Canada. And it was Indigenous peoples who taught those to Europeans, but Indigenous peoples learned that from the turtles, from the water, from the stars, from the moon. And so those are the best parts of treaty. That treaty is something that lives well beyond human beings. And treaty begins not with humans, but with the land itself, with the creation of the universe. Actually, it's not really just the land. When I say the land, by the way, I'm talking about the universe. I'm talking about the whole ways of the fabric of creation. So I hope that was useful. I hope that was a good way for you to understand treaties, because I think when people invite me to talk about treaties, they want me to talk about treaty rights. They want to say, oh, why does this guy get a pair of glasses paid for by the government? And that's one of the biggest problems in that when I get invited to speak about treaties, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what treaties are. And people have been taught to think that it's about rights and about Indigenous peoples getting the right to hunt, for example, or fish. But that's not really what it's all about. Do Indigenous peoples want to continue their relationship with the land? Absolutely. But from the Canadian perspective, treaties have become this very different thing than it was intended to be. It's really, the really basic difference is that Canada thinks treaties are about rights, individual things that we can do, or that we have a right to do, like a right to fish, or a right to believe in something, or a right to vote. Indigenous peoples would never say any of those things. What we would say is we have a responsibility to vote. We have a responsibility to have a relationship with the land. We have a responsibility to hunt and fish, because not only do we have to feed ourselves, but we also want to make sure that those fish don't get too plentiful, that they need us to be able to care for the river. They need for us to be responsible to not take too much, to make sure that we leave some food and some tobacco and give our time to the earth as it is given time to us. I hope that helps a little bit. I hope that gives you a little sense of what treaties are. And I hope that it gave you a sense of what the next session that we're going to do, which is on education. So you're going to say to yourself, well, how do we talk about education? Well, education is ultimately about how do we learn about other things together? How do we take these things like that we've realized are Indigenous in their core, like everything in Canada is Indigenous, 100%. Every penny on every paycheck, every policy, every breath that we take, every inch of the land, every drop of water is Indigenous. And that means that how do we learn about those things? Or what have we not learned about those things? And then ultimately, how do we meaningfully move together in a process of learning from each other in the kindest way that we can possibly do, so that we embody these principles of the land and treaty and become what we always should have been, which is Canadian. Notice I didn't say Canadian. To become Canadian means that we would fulfill the vision of what this place was supposed to be, which is the village, which is a place of people, of the land, of earth, of water, of looking after each other. And that's the essence of education, which is where we're going to head in the next session. We will do that, though. That will be in January. I'm going to warn everybody now, because I will have a tan, because I'm actually going down south. So there you go. So and now it's on January 18th. Yes, January 18th. So I will be slightly darker than I am now, because I am going to visit our southern relations. I'm actually giving a talk in Mexico City, which should be very exciting to a group of Indigenous peoples down there. And then I will come back, and I'll be back literally 2 days before that session. So I may still be in my southern bliss after seeing and witnessing. And none of you guys really know winter. I'm just going to show you quickly what winter actually looks like. So that's what winter actually looks like. Here in Treaty 1 territory, we actually live winter, like not like you guys in Toronto, where winter is just winter's like a weekend to you guys, So. Okay, so with that being said, I'll say miigwech, and thanks very much. I see a bunch of chat things. Maybe I'll just quickly go through any chats. Is there anything else that's... Did I miss anything there, Yvonne?
You did great. Thank you. I didn't realize I was coming into this one, but I think my opening just showcased what you were talking about. So we worked
well, I
well
sort of,
together.
I,
We worked well
I,
together. Thank you.
you know, sometimes you do these talks and you're like, you're gonna go in this direction, and then your opening was like, I should go in this direction. So
Ace.
yeah.
To me, it just reinforced the importance of our relationship to our Mother Earth, the land.
It even brings Haudenosaunee and Ojibwe people together, which are historical enemies. We tread very lightly on Haudenosaunee people.
Oh, I bet you do. Especially Mohawks.
I only make jokes when you're not here. So.
I hear it all. Usually if I'm in a big room, they start, and I'm out that way, I don't mention a Mohawk. I'll keep it to myself right now.
There's no, I make Mohawk jokes when the Mohawks aren't around. That's because I'm scared of them.
I was just going to say, because everybody fears the Mohawks.
I completely agree.
Great talk. I really enjoyed this. I stuck around because I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And it's good to know what I do also say to people. You say it as well. So to me, it just reinforced what I know. And I thank you for that knowledge. Thank you.
Oh yeah, me gotcha. And I walk in the footsteps of amazing, incredible people who come before me. And one of them being my father, who's brought me around the country when I was a kid, and I got to listen to all these different people. My father's Murray Sinclair, so I don't know if you probably know who my dad is. So, yeah, my dad brought me around, and I got to have a front row ticket to amazing people all across my life. And one of the most important relationships I ever got to have was with Tom Porter, who really spent a lot of time with me when I hung out with him a couple of years ago. Just a very kind, wonderful, wonderful person. And I hope that you all get a chance to hear your Mohawk, your Haudenosaunee relations, who are brilliant and amazing. And I only say that because I'm scared. I'm just joking. That was a joke. That's a joke. Okay, thanks everybody. I got to go because I actually got to be on APTN in about 2 minutes. So
thank you all so much for your gifted time. It went by so quickly, but we look forward to seeing you next time, and have a wonderful holiday.
Miigwech.
Miigwech.